Good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. Welcome to this thing that I do called Thor's Entertainment. I am Thor, and today I am commentating on another playthrough of the Invasions mode for Mortal Kombat 1. Previously, I had commentated on seasons 1 and 2 and shown gameplay from whenever I played through those seasons. I'll be doing that again here today for season 3, although this time around it's going to be substantially shorter. Certain things are going to be cut out of this playthrough, but I'll get into exactly what they are following the initial cutscene for Season 3 that explains who the big bad villain is going to be and what the general plot of things is going to be. Let's go ahead and kick that off, and then I'll be right back.
The Sub-Zero who attacks us, which is nothing less than to transform our timeline into a frozen hell. Since arriving in our timeline with his legion of cryomancers, Sub-Zero has been unwearying in his pursuit of conquest. The monstrousness of this Sub-Zero's plans are without equal in history. He takes no prisoners, spares no lives, bent as he is on erasing from existence anyone from any reality who does not share his Lin Kuei blood. It will take champions like you to turn back Sub-Zero's frigid onslaught. May your combat save all timelines from obliteration.
Alright, so the big bad villain for this season is going to be Sub-Zero, some alternate dimension version of Sub-Zero. Only this alternate dimension Sub-Zero is going to be mustache twirly kinds of evil. Now, granted, there wasn't a whole lot of a plot to the previous seasons of the Invasions mode, but at least the main villains kind of had something of a motivation. I mean, in Season 1, you had Scorpion trying to find Harumi, kind of a long-lost love scenario in another dimension. Season 2 had Natara using the alternate dimensions as a source of food for the other vampires. Here, however, Sub-Zero really doesn't have any grand motivation. Now, his simple motivation is, I just want to murder everyone who isn't Lin Kuei, and then freeze everything around me so that I create something of a new ice age for that dimension. And then I'm going to go to the next dimension and do the same thing. Like, there's really not too much going on there. Just Sub-Zero showing up saying I'm evil, killing a bunch of people, and, well, come find me. And that's exactly what we're going to do. However, this time around, I'm going to be cutting out all of the random encounters from the Invasions mode. I tried including them all previously because I wanted these to kind of be a playthrough of the Invasions mode from start to finish, from the very first cutscene to the last. But even when I started speeding up the footage and just cutting things out of the previous playthroughs, I still ended up making multiple parts for both seasons. And those episodes are about an hour apiece, so they were just incredibly long. And if I'm being honest, besides those cutscenes for the start and the finish of the Invasions mode, there's really not much going on. It's just hundreds of random encounters and with a lot of grinding. So, since there is not some crazy elaborate plot going on in the Invasions mode, I'm not going to try and drag this out for as long as I was the previous two seasons. I'll show the boss battles, I'll show the cutscenes, and then we're just going to go ahead and wrap things up. That way we are at least getting the most interesting part of the Invasions mode.
If I control time, I'll make a better world.
Your hubris is as unbound as your strength.
Now, even though I'm cutting out all the random encounters and a lot of the other little details that go into the Invasions mode, like the ambushes, the test your mights, the survival modes, a lot of those are kind of just repeats of each other, and after you've seen it once, you've kind of already seen it as many times as you're going to want to see it. At least in my opinion. I know whenever playing through this Invasions mode, regardless of the season, those got old kind of quickly. Now, if the Invasions mode starts incorporating some new ideas, perhaps makes it a little bit more interesting, I may extend out these playthroughs a little bit longer. But as of right now, they have not really made many changes to the Invasions mode, at least none that I would consider worth doing long recordings like I did for the last two seasons. But yeah, that is subject to change. I am voicing this over during Season 5, I believe. So yeah, even though this is Season 3, I am voicing it over from the perspective of somebody who is a few seasons ahead. They did go ahead and make a few changes to the Invasions mode, but nothing worth extending out these videos. But yeah, now we have our very first little mini-boss fight against Geras. I guess that means this is a Lin Kuei Geras. After all, Liu Kang said that the Sub-Zero who is invading, he only ever spares people who are part of the Lin Kuei, so yeah, this is a pretty odd little Geras. And we are starting off in the Tarkatan colony for this Invasions mode. That being level 1 kind of makes sense, maybe. After all, the Tarkatan wastes are kind of a desert, so I suppose that wouldn't be the easiest place for somebody who is a cryomancer and trying to freeze everything to start off. So at least our starting point kind of makes sense as the point furthest away from the final boss. And ultimately, the final level is going to be the Ramparts, which was the final level for Season 2 as well whenever we're fighting against Natara. That is the fortress level with all the snow. So yeah, it's kind of appropriate for Sub-Zero. And alright, we went ahead and defeated the very first mini-boss of the Invasions mode. That version of Geras is now gone, so I'm going to go ahead and skip to the very end of the Tarkatan Colony stage. That way we can fight against the real boss for this level. And alright, that little time skip has been accomplished. Let's go ahead and get the gate unlocked and hear what Liu Kang has to say about the level boss for this stage, and then we'll go ahead and jump into that boss battle.
Sub-Zero powers his war machine with his timeline's Tarkatans, led by their Baraka. This Baraka and his ilk have only ever known combat. You will never face a more lethal foe.
Okay, so this invading Sub-Zero does not have a problem with using Tarkatans in his army. I have some thoughts about that, but first, let's go ahead and hear the intro dialogue between Baraka and Omniman, and then we'll go over that.
Viltrumite medicine could cure your disease.
What strings are attached to that offer?
Oh, and that's kind of what to expect going forward. I will go ahead and have the intro dialogues on display in these recordings. That way we can kind of enjoy those, since those are kind of unique to those characters, and otherwise they don't really get highlighted in the Invasions mode. But I'll also go ahead and have whatever Liu Kang's dialogue is prior to somewhat major boss battles, because that dialogue for Liu Kang is entirely unique to the Invasions mode, and since those are seasonal, it's kind of the only time that you're going to get to hear those. So I'll try to make sure to include them. But yeah, I had some thoughts about Sub-Zero and the Tarkatans. Now I am pretty sure in the opening cinematic for this season of the Invasions mode, Liu Kang very specifically said that this invading Sub-Zero does not spare anyone unless they share his Lin Kuei blood. So you're either a member of the Lin Kuei in your dimension or you die. That was the gist I got from that cinematic. But Liu Kang went out of his way to say that this is a Tarkatan, that the Tarkatans are the people that he has as the frontline infantry for his invasions. Going out of his way to call them Tarkatans leads me to believe that they may not be Lin Kuei. So which is it going to be, Liu Kang? Does he spare no one unless they are Lin Kuei? Or does he make a few exceptions? There's something going on here. Because by the original logic, all the Tarkatans should be frozen icicles by now. But that's okay, I'm sure that won't be contradicted anymore throughout this playthrough of the Invasions mode. I'm sure this is just a one-off. But yeah, I do find that to be somewhat of an odd little contradiction to have for your very first stage boss of this Invasions mode. I'm going to continue to call it a contradiction because later on in this playthrough of the Invasion, other characters that are not traditionally Lin Kuei get referenced as being members of the Lin Kuei whenever Liu Kang introduces them. He just doesn't do it for Baraka or the other Tarkatans. So it does make me think that these characters are not part of the Lin Kuei, or at least the Tarkatans aren't part of the Lin Kuei. So I'm like, just over here wondering why an exception was made for them, but literally nobody else, at least based on the opening dialogue. Well, I suppose we're just going to be left wondering because we're not going to get an answer to that question, and Baraka is certainly not going to be telling us the answer to that question because he's only moments away from a brutality.
Have I proven my point?
Brutality. Omniman wins.
Alright, and we wrap up that very first boss battle with the Godhead Brutality for the cameo Kung Lao. And with that boss battle out of the way, we are pretty much done with the very first level. And I'm going to go ahead and do a time jump and just go into about midway through the second level. We will seamlessly see Omni-Man going through the portal at the very end of level 1, and then we'll be picking things up, like I said, around the midway point. And the second level itself is going to take place in the village where Kung Lao and Raiden are from. Can't remember the name of it offhand, but I'm sure you know the one. And yeah, now that we are about halfway through the village, we'll go ahead and kick off the very first mini-boss battle against this invading version of Havik. Let's go ahead and see what he has to say to Omni-Man.
Resistance is boneheaded, which suits you.
I'd rather die than submit to oppression.
You know, out of all the matchups against characters from the Mortal Kombat universe, this one kind of makes a ton of sense going against Omni-Man. I mean, Havik is the cleric of chaos, he's all about anarchy, and just kind of keeping things unruly as all can be. But then on the other side of the ring, we have Omni-Man, who is an intergalactic conqueror who is conquering planets for his empire so they can all be under that same rule. So it's all about control over all the planets that they can possibly get their hands on. And considering that Havik was already going against Saito for their oppressive government, I can't imagine how much he would hate the idea of Viltrum conquering this entire timeline. Keeping all of that in mind, yeah, this seems like a pretty realistic matchup if somehow Omni-Man ended up multi-dimension jumping into this universe. Now, granted, I imagine it would go absolutely horribly for Havik, but still, I could see the fight, especially if he had no idea what kind of power Omni-Man had. Actually, this is kind of unrelated to the invasions mode, but for my Fatal Friday series, where I try to get the finishers for all the Mortal Kombat characters, whenever I was using Omni-Man, I did end up going for a finisher against Havik, and that made it into one of my videos. And besides just that, let's go ahead and look at the very last boss that we fought against, which was Baraka. And I also have another finisher video for Omni-Man where I fought against Baraka. Now I'm kind of curious, how long can we keep that streak going of facing off against mini bosses or level bosses that were also my opponents in the Combat League whenever I was trying to get all of Omni-Man's finishers? Because we already know that the Invasion's boss is going to be Subzero at the very end. And of course, I went against Subzero and going for one of Omni-Man's finishers as well. Now, I don't exactly remember every single mini-boss, level boss, or any other kind of boss that was in this season of the Invasions mode, so maybe the streak will end really quickly. But I kinda hope it doesn't. It'd be kind of funny if there was like almost a direct sequence of opponents that match up almost exactly with what I was doing in that Fatal Friday series for Omni-Man. Let's see, off the top of my head, that would mean that I'd have to be going against Liu Kang, Kung Lao, Kenshi, other people using Omni-Man, which now that I'm saying all those names out loud, we're probably not going to get all of those in this invasions mode, but it was kind of a fun coincidence there for about 5 seconds. But yeah, just random thoughts. And now in the midst of all these matchup coincidences, the real question is, do I end up getting the same exact brutality against Havik that I got against him whenever, I was fighting against a real person in the Combat League? Because in that Fatal Friday video, I ended up getting the "you hear that" brutality for Omni-Man. So let's see if we can course correct and get the same brutality or not, because I don't actually remember which brutality I got against this Havik boss.
Too slow, too weak, too easy.
Brutality. Omni-Man wins.
The idea of killing Havik is kind of an odd one because he can heal. So I imagine he could heal from what would otherwise be fatal wounds, like in a lot of the brutalities. Now in this case, the Omni-Man brutality was coming through, which basically just leaves the opponent as a bunch of jelly on the ground. And yeah, I would just go ahead and classify that as one of the severe wounds that I don't think Havik is going to be healing from. So probably a very legitimate way to kill Havik. Anyway, moving on, let's go ahead and fast forward to the end of this stage and see who the level boss is going to be.
At least you look somewhat threatening.
My looks do not deceive.
And alright, the final boss for this level is going to be Generalshao. And I guess Liu Kang did not think this alternate dimension version of Generalshao was important enough to get his unique dialogue. Because we do not get Liu Kang explaining why this individual is so important to Sub-Zero's invasion. Which, that's nothing new. Certain people get that dialogue, other people don't. Don't really know what the criteria is for that, but apparently Shao did not meet that criteria. Which I guess technically means, for this alternate dimension Sub-Zero and his invasions, he considers Baraka more important than Generalshao. Because at least Baraka got some intro dialogue. Or I mean a description from Liu Kang. And what a strange world it truly is when Baraka is better than Shao. In many other alternate dimensions and timelines, Shao Kahn is rolling over in his grave or feeling just the weirdest walking over his grave at the moment. Like he should be feeling a lot of disturbances in the Force after I just said that. On the other hand, since Liu Kang did not bother to describe Generalshao to us, it leaves a lot open to interpretation. Like, for instance, Liu Kang was not around to tell us that General Shao is part of some other military or not part of the Lin Kuei, which is what he did for Baraka when he just referenced him as a Tarkatan instead of actually calling him a member of the Lin Kuei. So there's not going to be any controversy here for General Shao. He might legitimately just be part of the Lin Kuei in his alternate dimension. So whoever developed the storyline for this invasions mode, I guess you're off the hook for the contradictions for now. But just know I will be watching. I'm sure there are some more around here somewhere. But yeah, this is going to be technically the second time I have played through this Invasions mode season. The first time was just for me, and the second time was to get this footage for this, video. And that's one of the reasons I ended up going with Omniman for this playthrough, because I got to see what exactly I had to look forward to in the future boss battles. And without getting into too many details, I know after having fought the very last boss battle of this invasion season, that Omni-Man is actually exceptionally well equipped in order to take on that final boss. Now I'll go ahead and get into the exact reasons for why Omni-Man is beneficial in that boss battle whenever we actually get to that boss. But I figured I'd go ahead and point it out right now because, generally speaking, I pick a different character to do in these videos every single time that I'm highlighting an invasion season. And I thought it might be worth kind of pointing out why exactly I chose Omni-Man for this season. In the previous seasons, my reasoning was kind of random at best. Here, there is actually a legitimate one. And okay, I messed up my fatality there, but that's alright. We'll go ahead and press on to the very next level. And aside from just picking Omni-Man, I went ahead and paired him up with the cameo Kung Lao, which is the exact same pairing I used to get all of Omni-Man's finishers in my Fatal Friday series. So it was at least a pairing that I was familiar with to some extent. Granted, I was a little bit rusty because I had not used them in a little while. I think I had last used them at the very end of Season 1, beginning of Season 2, somewhere in there. So a couple of months had passed since I used these characters. So you'll still probably see me screwing up a few easy combos here and there, but overall I felt I was pretty familiar with them to the point where I could just pick them up and begin playing and then remembering how I used them as I went along. But yeah, level 3 is going to be at the Fire Temple, and we're going to go ahead and jump to the middle and go against the very first mini-boss of this level. And that's going to be Ashrah.
Demon, saint, what are you, Ashrah?
A weary soul seeking absolution.
And alright, I guess we're just going to have to go ahead and give Ashrah the same benefit of the doubt that we gave generalshao. And by that I mean, Ashrah did not get any sort of an explanation as to what her role was in the invasion on behalf of Subzero. So there was no kind of dialogue there to give us the impression that she may or may not be Lin Kuei. So since there is no real contradiction there, it's got to assume that perhaps in her dimension she was. Which isn't the craziest thing in the world. After all, a lot of the Lin Kuei don't have superpowers, a lot of them are just regular people, but then you have the Sub-Zero brothers with their cryomancy, and then at one point the Lin Kuei also in alternate dimensions went through the Cyber Initiative, so you had super mega ninja robot assassins. And then there's Smoke and Scorpion, which makes a guy who can control smoke and vapors, and there's also Scorpion like I said before, and he controls fire and such. So yeah, what I'm trying to say here is that the Lin Kuei is definitely not opposed to having a lot of odd, supernatural, superpowered, robotically and cybernetically advanced individuals on their teams. So I guess it would not be the most surprising thing in the world for the Lin Kuei to also recruit a demon like Ashrah. So sure, why not? Since there is not anything definitive that contradicts that kind of a concept, we'll just go ahead and say that Ashrah is a member of the Lin Kuei. Which makes sense since that would mean that Sub-Zero would have spared her and recruited her into his invasion efforts. That still does not explain why Baraka was spared, because he was described as just a simple Tarkatan, but you know what? Much to my surprise, so far there have not been any other contradictions.
Ever loyal to his Grand Master, this Smoke has committed his life to Sub-Zero. He will stop at nothing to win. Neither should you.
And okay, yeah, this one makes sense. Smoke is legitimately part of the Lin Kuei, so we'll just go ahead and add him to the list of people that probably are in the Lin Kuei, like generalshao and Ashrah from this alternate dimension.
Why not drop a smoke bomb, call it a night?
I don't flee from any opponent.
Oh yeah, and speaking of Ashrah, I didn't mention this before, but when fighting her, she was just labeled with the title of Mistress of Darkness, which is unacceptable to me. That title belongs to the one and only Elvira. Sorry, Ashrah, you're cool, but you are not the Mistress of Darkness. Actually, no, wait, I'm wrong. Elvira was the Mistress of the Dark, but it is so close I still refuse to accept it. Mistress of the Dark, Mistress of Darkness, whatever. Definitely Elvira. And next up on our tour of coincidences is Smoke. Coincidence being that this is yet another character that was used by somebody I was fighting against in the Combat League whenever I was going for one of Omniman's finishers. Actually, in the case of Smoke, it wasn't actually an Omniman finisher I was going for, it was one of the cameo Kung Lao's finishers. But it was still at least using the pairing of Omniman and the cameo Kung Lao. And the brutality I ended up getting for the cameo Kung Lao was the Razor Burn Brutality. And that is the brutality version of the low hat throw for the cameo Kung Lao. I think there was also a distance requirement for it, but other than that it was just a low damage attack, so your opponent had to be super weak and you kind of just had to hope for the best as far as having the distance right and it actually killing the opponent and activating the brutality. And that's the very last brutality that you can unlock for the cameo Kung Lao, so I definitely did not have it this early on into the invasions mode when playing with the pairing on an entirely different account, which would basically make it the first time I was playing those characters on that account. And yeah, that actually brings up a little bit of a complaint I had about the first few seasons of the invasions mode, which was just, it was already a gigantic grind going through a bunch of, I say a bunch, let me take that back. Going through hundreds of random encounters against these meaningless opponents just to get to these little bosses here and there that are slightly more meaningful, at least a little bit different, I guess. But on top of that already pretty gigantic grind just to get to the end of that season, as I pointed out in the previous 2 season playthroughs, even if you use the same characters, the same main character and the same cameo the entire time, by the time you reach the final boss, it was a very realistic possibility that you still would not have leveled up your cameo fighter enough to have their second brutality. So even going through all of that effort, you would still have to grind more just to get all of a character's finishers. Speaking of finishers, that one is actually kind of hilarious. That was the You Got Boned brutality for Omniman, and I guess the game glitched and Smoke never became visible again. He stayed invisible the entire time that he was just completely destroyed by Omni-Man, so he's just bleeding while invisible there on the ground the entire time. I had never seen that before, and I definitely forgot about it until just now.
Go ahead, arrest me, if you can.
If I can't, I will die trying.
Well, alright, at least Li Mei is being very realistic about the most likely outcome of this fight. But anyway, I was talking about the really slow level ups that were kind of plaguing the cameo characters whenever the first few seasons of the invasion mode were out. Like, it definitely took forever to get them leveled up all the way to have all their brutalities. And we're talking, I think I calculated out to be like 7, maybe 8 hours that I was spending on just playthroughs before I edited the videos. That is a crazy amount to be going through hundreds of battles and it's still not enough. Especially when we're talking about a roster this big. Like, if it was a smaller roster and you're spending that much time, I mean, that's fair, I guess. After all, you'd only have a few characters to work with, which would probably give them a lot more options. But yeah, you'd have to do this exact same process for pretty much every single member of the cast, which would just take forever. And whenever I put it that way, just calling it a grind, it kind of feels like understating it a little bit. Now, fortunately, the situation got substantially better. And it all started in the very next season of the invasion mode in Season 4. Suddenly leveling up the cameo fighters was a lot easier, but we'll get to that whenever I get to that season. For right now, though, I'm covering Season 3, and it was still broken at that time. And yeah, we managed to defeat Smoke and finish up the previous level at the Fire Temple, and then I went ahead and skipped to the middle of this next level here in the Living Forest. And we are fighting some sort of a version of Li Mei from the invading Subzero. And yeah, this fight is also almost over, which means we'll be soon progressing to the very end of the Living Forest level. At least I think we will. I don't think there are any more sub-bosses on this level. And yeah, we're kind of flying through this invasions mode playthrough. Now, I don't really remember which fatality or brutality I got on Li Mei, so I'm kind of curious about that. I guess we will see. Well, alright, I guess it was a fatality. Which one did I go with? And actually, it was nothing that I went for because I did not get the fatality off in time before the timer ran out. So, yeah, it's another generalshao situation where I had the opportunity for a finisher and I just kind of completely dropped the ball. That's alright though, not that important. Let's go ahead and press on to the end of the Living Forest level and see who the final boss is going to be and just keep on pressing through this playthrough. Actually, you know what? I lied. It does matter to me. It matters to me a lot. We're going to go back into that Li Mei battle. I'm going to get a finisher. And I'm thinking we're going to go for the You Got Boned brutality because while I did get that against Smoke earlier, he was invisible, so we did not actually get to see the brutality and get to appreciate it. So, yeah. I actually went back and did this fight over just to get a finisher. And then we will press on to the end of this level and fight the final boss, and then press on to the next level.
What a disgrace to your species.
Brutality. Omniman wins.
Melina can live so long as she's useful.
You will not harm her while I draw breath.
Now, I mentioned previously I had changed up how I was going to approach these videos. I was removing a lot of the playthrough from the invasions mode because it was all just kind of grindy and mostly just traveling around a tabletop kind of edition of various levels from Mortal Kombat. There just really was not a whole lot happening. So it didn't make sense to me to keep making these really 2-hour videos for the invasions playthrough that I broke up into 2 parts. So after I removed all that, I was kind of curious just how much shorter it was going to be. I figured it was going to be a lot, but for Season 1 and Season 2, those playthroughs were 2-parters, each of which were about an hour long, so realistically both of those playthroughs individually were 2 hours apiece. And now I've gotten to see how long this playthrough is going to be after my new editing style, and it's actually going to be just under an hour, so I did manage to cut this entire playthrough in half in comparison to the previous 2 seasons. And yeah, having the opportunity to cut these things down by an entire hour is going to be a big win for me, because editing down the first 2 seasons was honestly not the most fun experience. By the time I was done with the full 2-hour videos for both of the first 2 seasons, I definitely started to run out of things to talk about pretty early on whenever voicing those over. And this one has not been anywhere near as bad. It kind of feels like all the ranting I do throughout this video is, well, a lot more organic and a lot less forced than it was in the other videos because, well, I have not ran out of anything to talk about just yet. However, there still is a little bit more voicing over to do, so we will see if that ends up changing by the end of this video. But even having cut down the videos for the invasions mode by an hour, I still can't help but think to myself I can probably cut out a little bit more and we're really not losing that much because having played through this entire additional season, I can confidently say that the dialogue that's being said by the characters, whether that's the intro dialogues for the fights, which are not unique, you can pretty much hear those anytime these characters go against each other online or in just a random tower. I don't really feel like those need to be there, so those easily could have been cut out. And also, even when Liu Kang does have some dialogue about one of the bosses, it's not really super important. He kind of just pops up for a second and says, hey, this guy's a pretty big threat. And then Liu Kang disappears. About the only meaningful dialogue in these seasons is whenever we get the intro and the outro cinematics for whenever we first get introduced to the boss, and then at the very end right before we fight the boss and right after we defeat the boss. So pretty much the only cutscenes or dialogue worth mentioning are at the very beginning and the very end of the seasons, so I do think I'm going to end up cutting these down even shorter, and primarily just featuring those cutscenes in the final boss fight. We will see, but even at an hour long, it still kind of feels like this video is a little bit too long. So that being said, whenever we get to the very next season, don't be surprised if we end up cutting it down even more. And alright, it is time for the next mini-boss on the next level. Let's see what he has to say.
I claim this timeline for the Viltrum Empire.
You will burn for this invasion.
And I guess I really didn't talk about it too much in the previous fight or the previous level, but we did end up reaching the Living Forest final boss. And that last boss for the Living Forest was Tanya. We ended up defeating Tanya pretty easily, and then we ended it with a brutality for Omniman. That brutality was specifically the You Hear That brutality. And immediately after that fight, we went ahead and briskly went on to the very next level, which is going to be Shang laboratory. And like with the previous levels, I went ahead and skipped to about the middle of that stage, and we're now fighting the mini-boss for that level, the halfway boss. Which for Shang Tsung's laboratory, that mini-boss is going to be Scorpion. It is kind of weird seeing Scorpion all decked out in blue like he's Sub-Zero, but you know what, why not, sure. I mean, it is thematically appropriate for this season, and, you know, being part of the Lin Kuei, and I guess everybody being uniform for this invasion, but it's still kind of weird to see Scorpion not in some kind of yellow or orange. And also, this Scorpion that we're facing off against in Shang Tsung's laboratory is being backed up by the cameo Goro, which was also the cameo that was being used by Tanya at the very end of the Living Forest. So I guess Goro is just kind of being passed around and re-gifted, and just no one for the Lin Kuei wants to get stuck with this guy, but yet somehow everyone is. Also, does that mean Goro is Lin Kuei in this scenario? Like for this invading force, somehow, a member of the Shokan and Outworld found his way to Earthrealm and decided, you know what, I'm gonna join the assassin Lin Kuei. I'm sure no one's gonna judge me for having 4 arms. After all, there's a guy that can freeze shit, there's a guy that can set shit on fire, and there's also a bunch of robot people. Excuse me, cyborgs. Yeah, sure, why not? He fits in there. Just completely random, but granted, you can end up with any cameo in this, so I understand that's kind of completely random, but if you try to actually make sense of it based on the storyline that they're trying to go for the invasions mode, seeing Goro partnered up with the Lin Kuei is just a really wild sight. And alright, we're making pretty short work of Scorpion, and he's basically done now, so really the only decision we have left to make with this fight is exactly how we're going to finish off the opponents. And, well, I went for a fatality, but just like with generalshao, I kind of dropped that thing. And unlike with Li Mei, I'm not really interested in going back and trying to get the fatality or the brutality just for comedic effect. We'll just go ahead and accept this one as a victory and move on to the final boss of this level.
The notion of a Shangtsung who is also Lin Kuei is disturbing. Do not allow him to unleash his magic upon this timeline, or millions of innocents will perish.
And alright, very appropriately for the Shang Tsung's laboratory level, the final boss is going to be, well, Shang Tsung himself. Let's go ahead and see what he has to say to Omniman.
Schemers like you rot the core of civilization.
I see there's no winning you over. Pity.
Alright, so like I said, next up we have Shang Tsung. He's going to be defending, or well, not really defending since he's an invading Shang Tsung from another dimension, but he is going to be fighting in an alternate dimension, our dimension's version of Shang Tsung's laboratory. Also, I definitely almost flubbed that line because I really wanted to say Dexter's laboratory for some reason, but fortunately I restrained myself. Now, one of the few things I can really compliment the invasions mode on are these boss fights, because generally speaking, they try to do a little bit of different things with them than what you would get from a standard fight. And they also give the bosses moves that their regular character versions that you can control just don't have. Like back in the Living Forest, they managed to give Tanya this barrage of different projectile fists that she sends at you, which is a little bit different than just her single shot ones that she can do whenever you're controlling her. And like in Season 1, I remember that there's basically a miniature survive mode whenever you're fighting that invasion boss of Scorpion, when he would send fiery chains across the screen and stuff like that. So they do try to get a little bit creative with the boss battles, which I can appreciate. Although I do feel like they really put a good amount of effort into some of the bosses here in this third season. And without getting into the big change that this Shang Tsung boss has going for him, just know that whenever we do defeat Shang Tsung, he does not go out with a accepting of defeat mentality. And it is because of that that Shang Tsung throws one more challenge at you at the very end of his fight that I don't think I've seen in any of the other boss battles in this game. And I have to admit, it was a pretty fun idea, even though, if I'm being honest, it's also kind of a cheap way of getting you killed. And as I am speaking about it, it is now happening on screen. We managed to get Shangtsung all the way down to just the smallest sliver of health, and then he dips out before we can finish him off. And in his absence, he summons a little soul NATO with little soul projectiles going right into that tornado. And of course, if we end up getting hit by those little souls, they do damage and they continue to knock us back and get us closer to the actual soul NATO. And if we go into the soul NATO, it's an instant death. And since the souls do a decent amount of damage, even though you're blocking them, those can also kill you if you're on pretty low health. So yeah, you basically have to have a really good amount of health left at this point in the game, block all of that, and then hope you just have enough health left because guess what? Shangtsung's not dead yet, so whenever the Soul NATO part's over, he hops back into the fight, and you still have to defeat him. Which is something I did not waste any time with whatsoever, because as soon as he was back in the field of play, I instantly activated our Fatal Blow. It landed, and that's definitely going to do enough damage to finish off Shangtsung. Which, at his low of health, pretty much any hit would have done it, but now we're doing it in style. And then unlike with Scorpion and generalshao, we are not going to be screwing up the fatality this time. I'm going to be going for the like putty fatality for Omniman, which means we're going to be sending Shangtsung's eyeball flying out of his head, and then we're going to use his head as a battering ram to split his body in half. Or, well, his head separated, and then we separate the rest of his body in half, so I guess we technically separate his body into 3 pieces, not half, but you get the idea. Oh, and then we stomp on his head for one final exclamation point. So going from Fatal Blow to that's definitely winning with style. And just like that, we are nearly done with this playthrough of the Invasion Mode Season 3. Because the very next level is going to be the final level. We go from Shangtsung's laboratory to the ramparts. And I think that means we only have 2 bosses to go. One more mini-boss and then the final boss. Actually, there might be 2 mini-bosses, I can't remember. So it's either 2 or 3 remaining. And I decided to look ahead in the footage to see just how many we have left. We do in fact have 2 mini-bosses left, and then the final boss Subzero. The 2 mini-bosses are going to be Raiden and Rain. And I skipped ahead to the point where we're about to fight Raiden. Let's go ahead and listen to what he has to say.
Devote your service to me, Raiden.
I won't serve anyone who would harm Earthrealm.
And it does not matter if he's trying to defend Earthrealm or not, Raiden is about to get absolutely destroyed. Why, you ask? Well, because we have decided to finally break out the ultimate Omniman. And the ultimate Omniman is Pink Omniman. And my only regret when making videos for Omniman in the Combat League for my Fatal Friday series was that I did not use the Pink Omniman more. So I can pretty confidently say that the ultimate Omniman is disappointed in me, but we're going to try and redeem ourselves here against Raiden in the invasion mode. Because Pink Omniman is here, and he is ready to kick ass. And I guess I really haven't mentioned it, but it's probably pretty obvious for anyone watching this. Like, throughout the entire video, Omniman's costume has been subtly just kind of changing throughout the entire playthrough. I made a point that basically every single level or every few bosses, I would go ahead and change the outfit for Omniman. I was hoping that if nothing else, we would at least have some visual differences between each level for the character I was using to kind of just mix things up a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. I definitely don't think I went through every single palette that is available to Omniman, but I came pretty close. There is one more that I still have to use in this video after the second mini-boss, so you do have that to look forward to, but for right now we're going to go with Pink Omniman. But yeah, gee whiz, after every level or so I did go ahead and change out his costume and just didn't really draw too much attention to it. It was just kind of something happening in the background. It was probably only really noticeable whenever the fight started and then there was actually a bit of color to Omniman, or a lack thereof if we're talking about the white and gray outfit. And the final palette that I'm saving for Omniman is the palette of colors on his outfit that happens to match the costume for Invincible. So yeah, now you know that is going to be the finale outfit for Omniman. Alright, and now there is only one more round to go against Raiden, and then we are done, and we're moving to the second to last boss in the invasion mode. And wow, okay. The electric force fields from Raiden did a lot more damage than I thought they were going to do. Basically, every time one of those things hit me and it wasn't blocked, it was taking about 10% off of my health. I am not used to that whenever I go through the invasions mode. Normally you're leveling up so much along the way that By the time you get to the very end, the opponents are barely doing any damage to you, and you have no real threat of losing your life unless it's like the final round and the boss is doing like that damage over time to you just based on you being in proximity of them. Which I mentioned that back in like season 1, but that's pretty much the only way that some of the bosses can beat you, is not necessarily by hitting you, but just being by you and being close enough for that damage to rack up from just being close to you. And geez, between that force field and the damage over time from Raiden, this might be my very first loss of the invasion run. Like, at this point, I'm just having to resort to a desperation fatal blow just to kind of cling to any chance I have at still winning this thing. I'm trying to stay away from him to avoid that damage over time, but I have to get in close, and that uppercut actually did a good amount of damage. If I can just get one more of those, I may still actually have a shot here. And, well, yeah, I did have a shot there with an uppercut because that's the classic brutality, and I won that by just a sliver of health. Goodness, that was by far the closest fight that we've had so far in this invasion run. And as we jump ahead closer to the end of this level, let's hope that the mini-boss Rain does not quite give us as much trouble. But let's go ahead and see what he has to say.
You're ambitious to a fault.
Says the universe-conquering braggart.
So yeah, Raiden had the extra ability in that previous fight to start doing that electricity force field blast across the entire screen, and that almost killed me. Like, by far the closest fight that we've had throughout this entire invasion's run, but this wasn't the only fight against a mini-boss or a stage boss that featured a gimmick that the standard version of the character does not have. Like, normal Raiden does not have that electricity force field that he can blast across the screen. And going back a little bit to the stage boss Shangtsung, he ends up summoning that Soul Nado almost at the very end of the fight, and he clearly does not have that with the standard version you can control. And I do kind of love that. It's nice whenever there's something that really distinguishes the boss characters from the standard characters, making them really feel like a difficult fight. Even if, depending on how you level up your character, if you over-level them, if you do all the boosters that upgrade their resistances and stuff like that, pretty much any boss fight in this game can be really, really easy in the invasions mode, but I really didn't do that. I was trying to speed through this as much as I could, so my character is not max level, not max resistances, none of that. And whenever you try to just run through it like I am doing, and I don't have all the resistances, those boss fights can occasionally present a good challenge. Now, granted, that's not often. Like I said, the only one that really came close for me to lose was against Raiden, but still, a little bit of a challenge. In the case of the Soul Nado, at least I was having something really new and cool to look at. Alright, that was a much easier mini-boss battle, and now it's time to retire Pink Omniman and bust out the Invincible Omniman. It's time to face off against Subzero.
Despite your victories against his minions, Sub-Zero's icy resolve has not been melted. Perhaps defeating him will shatter it.
Cold can't stop me, not even in deep space.
Everyone has a weakness. I will find yours.
Alright, using the element which brings life. That is how we are going to defeat this invading version of Sub-Zero. Now that's kind of a fun quote for anyone who remembers the original Mortal Kombat movie, because that was also the clue given to Liu Kang in order to defeat that Sub-Zero in that movie as well. As just a little bit of background on the old Mortal Kombat movie, they went out of their way to basically make Sub-Zero look invincible in that film. And he was just shattering people by freezing them, and well, we then got to see them explode into a million pieces. I guess there was really only one example of that happening in the movie, but it was a very good example, and it kind of did make him look like he could not be beaten. And as the protagonist characters began to progress through the tournament in that movie, eventually we find Liu Kang facing off against that movie's version of Kitana. Now this was also the old timeline version of Kitana, or at least it was based on that. So in that scenario, it was not just Princess Kitana and Generalshao, This was the world of Shao Kahn, and Katana was his adopted daughter in that world. So yeah, she went through her angsty daughter phase in that film, was like, screw you, Dad. I don't care about your mission to go conquer all the realms, I'm gonna go ahead and help out the opposing team. And then she was like, Liu Kang, guess what? That Sub-Zero guy? It turns out throwing water at him is a very effective method for beating him, because if you throw water at him, because he is freezing everything in the surrounding area, any water that you throw at him will get frozen and turn into a projectile. Some of which will turn into gigantic ice shards that can impale a guy. So yeah, go ahead and do that and maybe you can beat Sub-Zero. Or at least that's probably what she should have said. Instead, whenever they were fighting against each other, Katana whispered to Liu Kang that in his next fight he needed to use the element which brings life. Which was cryptic as hell and not very specific, so Liu Kang had no idea what she was talking about. And then he went on to face off against Sub-Zero. And things are going pretty well for a moment. The two of them managed to keep the combat hand-to-hand for a while, but eventually Sub-Zero gets tired of it and says, screw this, I'm going to go ahead with my move that gives me the guaranteed win. I'm going to freeze everything in the room. And Liu Kang still had not figured out that whole element that brings life bullshit, but at the last minute before he could be frozen, he's like, wait a minute, water. And then he picks up a bucket of water, chucks at Sub-Zero, and then somehow all the water in that bucket miraculously takes the form of one gigantic frozen spike, and then impales Sub-Zero, and he ends up freezing himself. And then we get a dead icicle Sub-Zero. Now there are a lot of little corny things about that movie that I kind of love in hindsight, but yeah, the odds of that water that Liu Kang threw forming a perfect little spear of ice is just hilarious in hindsight. I want to see the alternate ending where that water just turns into a bunch of ice cubes, individual segments of ice, and it just inconveniently pelts Sub-Zero, but ultimately barely disturbs him, and then he just goes on and continues freezing the room, and then we have frozen dead Liu Kang. And then Outworld wins that 10th tournament in a row, and well, all the bad guys win. The end. But no, Liu Kang got the luckiest throw in the world and beat Sub-Zero, and we're going to try and reenact that here today. Just go ahead and keep that scene in mind as we progress through this fight, and we'll see if we can kind of reenact it. I mean, surely they wouldn't give us that quote for no reason, and surely those inconspicuously placed buckets all around the arena aren't there for no reason. So yeah, stay tuned. And alright, we are nearly at the very last portion of this fight. I believe it's a 3-rounder against Sub-Zero where he gets progressively more difficult as the fight goes on. I know he starts throwing a bunch of unique projectiles at you as the rounds increase. And in the 3rd round, Sub-Zero actually has an instant victory freeze that he can do. And you have to get off the ground because he freezes the ground in order to activate that. Now, if you're any other character, that means just jumping, basically. But I found that Omniman was the easiest character to win this fight with, because Omniman can just do his Viltrumite stance in midair, just jump up, do that stance, and then he's going to stay there for a good amount of time, long enough for Sub-Zero to freeze the ground and for it to recover to the point to where you're not going to be one-hit KO'd. And also Omniman is useful for all the other projectiles that are unique to Sub-Zero in this fight as well. Like, I know he summons a barrage of ice balls and gets those thrown at you as well, and the Viltrumite stance, if you're in it, will just dodge every single one of them. In fact, I believe it can also dodge his spears and axes that he throws at you as well. So yeah, if you selected Omniman back during Season 3, this was probably one of the easier fights, despite being a final boss. Because all the most challenging things about this fight, well, you can pretty much dodge all of them by using the Viltrumite stance. Oh wait, it's happening. Sub-Zero is trying to freeze the entire area just like he did in the movie. Punch the water, throw the water, give me the water spear. Show me that movie moment. And there it is. We managed to impale Sub-Zero by throwing the water bucket at him, and it created that little water spear, or excuse me, the ice spear, impaled him in place, and then he froze himself. They actually copied the death scene for Sub-Zero from the original Mortal Kombat movie and applied it here to this boss fight, which is kind of awesome.
Even in defeat, this dark Sub-Zero proved most intransigent. Given the chance to surrender, he refused to concede, forcing my allies to finish him. Robbed of their Grandmaster's cunning and tactical genius, Sub-Zero's cryomancers quickly fell to pieces. The rout that followed was utterly complete. It will take decades to repair this Cold War's devastation. But as the ice thaws and a new spring begins, I find myself hopeful. Once again, my champions have risen to this timeline's defense. And once again, they have emerged victorious.
So yeah, I already talked about how that death scene for Sub-Zero, the invasion boss, was a total reenactment of what happened in the original Mortal Kombat movie, but something I did not mention, the in-game mechanic for that force field that Sub-Zero has, where he's freezing the entire area and just continues to expand. Yeah, if you don't punch the water at him, that is also an instant death. Punching the water at him is the only way to beat Sub-Zero there, otherwise you will die. Which is kind of a neat concept. They didn't do that for any of the other invasion bosses where there was a condition for you to win like that. So it is very fun that they took something from the old movie, and even if it was corny, it was fun, and then they made that the unique win condition for the fight, otherwise you would lose. And I believe that has to make this my favorite boss battle out of all the invasion mode bosses because it was the only one that was that unique. Like, that was pretty creative. And as much as I did criticize the invasions mode for being super repetitive and just the same thing over and over and over again in the previous 2 seasons, I have to give it a little bit of credit whenever it actually did something original and unique like that. I think if we got more stuff like that in the invasions mode, it would overall be a much more enjoyable experience, even if it is still incredibly grindy. After all, we're still having to fight hundreds of random encounters, so little things like that can only improve it so much, but it is still an improvement and I enjoyed it. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for Season 3 of the Invasions mode. We will pick things back up with Season 4 in the very next episode. Until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.
Too slow, too weak, too easy.
Omniman wins.